The ocean is not empty tonight. Right now, somewhere in the deep water of the Pacific, or the Southern Ocean, or the warm highways of the Atlantic, something is moving. It is not moving quickly. Nothing that large needs to hurry. It moves the way vast things move, with a patience that makes the word patience seem too small. The way a river moves through stone it has been carving for 10,000 years. It rises to the surface once every several minutes, expelling a column of vapor 9 meters high that can be seen from kilometers away, then folds back into the water with a slowness that the eye struggles to accept. It does not know we are watching. It has no reason to think about us at all. The blue whale, Balanoptera musculus, the largest animal confirmed to have existed on this planet in the history of life, in any era, across 4 billion years of creatures moving through water and land and air. Not a candidate, not the largest of a handful of contenders. The confirmed record holder. Its tongue alone weighs more than most adult elephants. Its heart is the size of a small car. Through its aorta, the main vessel carrying blood from that heart outward to the rest of its body, a small child could fit with room to spare. Its call, produced at a frequency so far below what the human ear can detect without instruments, is among the loudest sounds made by any living organism on Earth. Louder than a jet engine at close range, carried in the right conditions for hundreds of miles through the deep ocean. And we do not know what a blue whale dreams. If it dreams, we have never witnessed one giving birth. We have never seen one sleep. We have never followed a complete migration from beginning to end. We have no clear picture of how blue whales find each other, or what they communicate when they do, or whether the long, low calls we have recorded carry meaning in any form we would recognize as such. We have mapped more of the surface of Mars than we have explored the ocean floors these animals cross in their great crossings. The largest life this planet has ever produced exists right now, mostly beyond the edge of what we are able to know. It has been this way for most of human history. We lived beside the ocean for thousands of years, watched the blow rising from the surface, knew there was something vast beneath it, and never got close enough to learn what it actually was. The tools for that kind of knowledge, the hydrophones and the satellite tags and the submersibles, are recent. We are at the very beginning of a genuine acquaintance. What we have learned in the last few decades has overturned almost everything we thought we knew, and what remains to be learned is larger still. This is not just a journey into deep water. It is a journey into scale and sound and loss. It is a journey into what it means to share a world with something so vast and so long-lived that its existence quietly rewrites what we think we understand about the nature of life. If you find this slow, quiet exploration of mystery something you genuinely enjoy, I would be grateful if you would like the video and subscribe. Letting me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you is always a quiet comfort. Now find your comfortable position. Dim the lights. Take a slow breath. We are leaving the map behind. The map we carry of whales was drawn mostly by people who were killing them. The whalers of the 19th century understood whale anatomy with a precision that no scientist on land could match, because they spent their working lives cutting into whales at sea. They understood the architecture of a sperm whale's body in exhaustive commercial detail. They knew which portions yielded the most oil and which could be discarded. They knew which species were easiest to approach and which were fast enough to escape a rowing boat. What they did not investigate, because it was not useful to the industry they were running, was what a whale did between the time it surfaced and the time they killed it. The map they left us was a map of dead things, organized entirely by commercial value. When we picture a whale today, most of us picture something large and solitary and essentially simple. A creature that eats and migrates and breeds and breathes. A backdrop animal, decorating the ocean the way mountains decorate a landscape behind something more important. That picture is wrong in almost every specific detail, except the breathing. Whales are not solitary. Many species live in social structures, as complex and stable as anything observed in long-lived land mammals. Individual humpback whales form lasting associations with specific others that persist over years and are renewed on the breeding grounds. Sperm whales live in matrilineal clans, extended family groups that share feeding territories and social traditions, passing information about prey location in ways that look like coordinated behavior. Killer whales have dialects. The vocal repertoire of one population differs measurably from that of a population 50 kilometers away, and the dialects are not genetically determined. They are learned. Calves born into a pod acquire the sounds of their family by exposure in the first months of life, the way a human infant acquires the phonemes of its native language. The clearest evidence for cultural transmission in cetaceans comes from the killer whale populations of the Pacific Northwest, which have been studied continuously since the early 1970s. The northern and southern resident populations share the same waters and feed on the same prey. They do not mix. Each carries its own vocal repertoire, its own foraging techniques, its own social patterns. The dietary preferences of the two populations differ in ways that cannot be explained by prey availability alone. They choose differently. They teach their choices. A calf born into one of these pods acquires, in the first years of its life, a set of behavioral patterns that will be distinctive to that family for its entire lifespan. This is not genetics. It is culture, operating in a body that does not look like a body we expect culture to inhabit. And they are not silent. The ocean in which whales live is threaded with their voices, many of those voices operating in frequency ranges too low for the human ear to register without instruments. This is precisely why we assumed for so long that the deep ocean was a quiet place. It is not quiet. It never has been. It has been full of sound, in the frequencies whales use, for tens of millions of years. We simply lacked the ears to hear it. The map was wrong before we began drawing it. We are only now starting to understand how wrong. The body of a blue whale is simply beyond what the mind is built to hold. We have words for size and we deploy them constantly, and they function adequately for the range of things we encounter. A large dog, a big tree, a massive building. These comparisons work because the objects they describe live within the scale. Our nervous systems evolved to perceive and compare directly. The blue whale does not live in that scale. It exists past the boundary of direct comprehension, out in the territory where the numbers are accurate and the feelings fail. Consider the tongue. A blue whale's tongue weighs roughly 2.5 metric tons, approximately the weight of an adult hippopotamus. It moves inside a mouth large enough to hold a small gathering of standing people. That mouth opens in a lunge, the pleated throat expanding to engulf a volume of seawater and krill that can exceed the whale's own body weight, then closes over a curtain of baleen plates hanging from the upper jaw. Each plate is roughly a meter in length and fringed with dense bristles along its inner edge. The water is forced out through those bristles. The krill cannot pass and remain trapped. The whale swallows several hundred kilograms of krill in a single lunge and may take dozens of lunges during a single feeding dive. The blue whale's relationship with its prey is, in its own way, as strange as the whale itself. The largest animal ever to have existed on Earth feeds almost exclusively on some of the smallest organisms in the ocean. Antarctic krill, Euphausia superba, is a shrimp-like crustacean, roughly 5 to 7 centimeters in length. The blue whale eats roughly 4 million of them per day during the feeding season, consuming approximately 3.5 tons of krill every day to maintain its body and build the blubber reserves it will draw on during the long months of fasting that follow. This relationship, the largest consumer and its tiny prey, holds much of the ecology of the Southern Ocean together. When whale populations were reduced to a fraction of their former numbers by the whaling industry, the krill those whales had been eating accumulated in the ocean in quantities that may have sustained rapid growth in the seal and penguin, populations that expanded in the decades that followed. The heart beats between 4 and 8 times per minute at rest. When the whale dives, the rate drops toward 2 beats per minute, a physiological shift so extreme that the same pattern in a human body would indicate impending cardiac arrest. That heart pumps blood through vessels of such diameter that a child could crawl through the main arteries without difficulty. The entire cardiovascular system is scaled to distribute oxygen through a body roughly 30 meters long and weighing upward of 150 metric tons. A blue whale in the wild is estimated to live for 80 to 90 years. Some may survive longer. The largest life our planet has ever produced does not know its own rarity. It simply continues. Segment 4, The Surface and Its Secrets. The problem with knowing a whale is that we live on the wrong side of the water. A blue whale spends the overwhelming majority of its existence below the surface. It comes up for seconds and exhales and inhales in a few rapid breaths, then descends again for 20 minutes or longer. From a research vessel watching through binoculars, you receive a back and a spout and perhaps a tail. Something the length of a commercial airliner reveals itself for the time it takes to breathe, then withdraws entirely. You wait and watch the flat surface of the water, and the whale is somewhere below you, doing something you cannot see. The ocean is not transparent. Below 200 meters, sunlight dims to near total absence. Below 1,000 meters, there is no light of any kind. Below that threshold, which the sperm whale crosses routinely, and some beaked whales sometimes exceed, the ocean is as dark as it is possible for any environment on Earth to be. We cannot follow with cameras in any practical sense. We cannot observe directly. We can attach satellite-linked tags to individual whales, and the tags transmit data when the animal surfaces, and from those transmissions we can build a picture of where the whale goes and to roughly what depth. But the tag reports position and depth. It does not report behavior, social interaction, feeding success, or the acoustic environment the animal is living in. One of the unexpected consequences of the Cold War was what it made available to marine biologists when the threat it was built to address diminished. The United States Navy's sound surveillance system, known as SOSUS, was a network of hydrophones installed on the ocean floor, designed to detect the acoustic signatures of submarines at long range. When the Cold War ended and access was cautiously extended to researchers, marine biologists discovered they had inherited an instrument built precisely for whale listening. The network picked up the calls of blue whales and fin whales at ranges of hundreds of kilometers. It tracked individual animals across ocean basins by their distinctive vocal signatures. The calls that had been inaudible to the research vessels of earlier decades were suddenly clear, all the way across the deep sound channel, because the Navy had built exactly the right instruments to hear them without knowing that was what they were for. What we know of whale behavior in the open ocean has come from a handful of coastal populations, patient enough to tolerate research boats over many years. The sperm whales that live in the waters around Dominica, the humpbacks that return each winter to the banks north of Hawaii, the killer whale families of the Pacific Northwest, followed continuously since the 1970s. These populations have taught us more than everything that came before them combined. And they are not typical. They live near land, in conditions where a boat can follow without disrupting them too severely. The ocean's largest residents, crossing the open Pacific in their great migrations, are by comparison almost entirely beyond our reach. In 1967, a biologist named Roger Payne sat down with a set of recordings made by a Navy hydrophone operator named Frank Watlington, who had been stationed in the waters off Bermuda. The equipment Watlington operated had been installed at depth in the ocean as part of a network designed to track the acoustic signatures of submarines at long range. What it had been picking up, consistently and with remarkable clarity, was something no naval engineer had expected. Payne listened to the recordings for hours. What he heard were long sequences of sound that rose and fell in patterns, each sequence repeated. Each repetition was varied in small ways. The sounds ranged from high keening tones to low rolling bass notes that sat below the comfortable register of music and seemed to come from somewhere fundamental in the structure of sound itself. Some sequences continued for 20 minutes or more without a break. They were structured, they repeated, they changed, and they were coming from humpback whales. Payne understood, sitting with those recordings, that these animals were not simply vocalizing. They were producing organized sequences of sound that had internal structure, and that, by any reasonable definition, could be called songs. In 1970, Payne and his colleague Scott McVeigh published their findings and described what they had heard as songs, a term that had never before appeared in a peer-reviewed scientific paper to describe the vocalization of any non-human animal. The word was deliberate and was not welcomed by all. It implied capacities that many in the scientific community were not yet ready to acknowledge. In the years that followed, researchers began studying the songs with increasing technical rigor. What they found was that the songs are not fixed. A phrase that is standard in a population one year may be modified or replaced the following year. New elements appear and spread, old elements drop away. The changes are not random, and are not different from individual to individual within a population. The whole population updates together in a consistent direction so that each season's version is recognizably descended from the last. Someone innovates, others learn, the innovation spreads, and then it becomes the norm, and then it too begins to change. The mechanism is the same mechanism by which human musical styles evolve across a culture. It operates in a body very different from ours, in a medium we cannot easily enter, across distances we cannot easily cross. But it is the same mechanism. The recordings were pressed into an album and released to the public. It sold over 100,000 copies in its first year. For most of the people who heard it, it was the first evidence they had ever encountered that whales made sounds at all, let alone sounds of this character. The album arrived exactly as public opposition to commercial whaling was beginning to organize, and the two things fed each other in ways that produced, eventually, the international moratorium that followed. The songs had been in the ocean the whole time, in a register we could not hear, carrying meaning we still do not fully understand. Somewhere in the ocean, a whale is calling. It has been calling for as long as anyone has been tracking it, which is approximately 30 years. It calls at 52 Hz, a frequency slightly above the lowest note a standard tuba can produce. Every other whale of the species it most closely resembles in call structure. The blue whale calls at frequencies between 10 and 40 Hz. No confirmed response from any other animal has ever been detected. No other whale in any ocean is known to call at this frequency. It is alone in its register. The animal has been tracked on hydrophone arrays across the North Pacific for decades. Its call signature is distinctive enough that researchers can identify it across recordings made years apart. The calls follow seasonal patterns consistent with migration between feeding and breeding grounds, which means the animal has survived and continues to move as large whales do. It is not a distress signal. It is not the cry of something stranded or sick. It is the ordinary long-distance communication call of a whale, produced at a frequency the ocean carries well, and no other whale appears to use. The deep sound channel is the ocean's long-distance communication system, and it was discovered, like so many things, about the ocean's acoustic properties by engineers building instruments for war. During the Second World War, American researchers found that at a certain depth, sound slows as the water cools, and then speeds again as pressure increases, and the two effects cancel in a way that traps sound and guides it across thousands of kilometers without significant loss. A small explosion in the channel could be detected by a hydrophone far away. The Navy classified the discovery immediately. The great whales had known it for millions of years. Their voices are tuned to the frequencies the channel carries best, the way a singer learns to project into the resonance of a particular hall. Except the singer had tens of millions of years to learn, and the hall is an ocean. The 52 Hz whale calls above the optimal range for its kind. We cannot say whether its calls travel as far, or whether any other large whale can detect them, or whether the animal has ever received a response in 30 years of calling. We know only that it calls, and the ocean in that frequency does not answer. That fact persists regardless of the language we use for it or the interpretations we place on it. The calls go out, the silence comes back. It has been this way as far as anyone can tell, for 30 years, The scientists who have tracked the 52 Hz whale most carefully have speculated about what it is. One early hypothesis was that it is a hybrid between a blue whale and a fin whale, a cross that does occur in the wild, and that could plausibly result in a vocal apparatus intermediate between the two species, calling at a frequency between the blue whale's range and the fin whale's range. Another possibility is that it is a malformed individual of one species, whose vocal tract produces sounds above the species norm. A third, more speculative possibility is that it is the last survivor of a small population that called at this frequency, a population that has otherwise disappeared, and whose extinction went unnoticed because we were not listening carefully enough or early enough. None of these hypotheses has been confirmed. The whale has never been sighted with any certainty. There is no conclusion to the story yet, only the call, repeating in a frequency the ocean does not answer. The sperm whale's head takes up roughly 1/3 of the animal's total length, and it is one of the most extraordinary biological structures in the living world. The upper portion of that head is filled with a pale, waxy substance called spermaceti. The whalers who named it did so in a moment of confusion about what they were cutting into, and the name stayed. The spermaceti organ is bounded by dense connective tissue and walls of fat. At the front of the head, inside a separate compartment, sits the structure called the junk, a layered arrangement of oil-saturated tissue and dense cartilaginous walls that functions as a sound lens. The sperm whale produces its clicks inside the nasal passages at the front of the head, and those clicks pass through the spermaceti and the junk in a way that focuses and amplifies them into a directed beam. That beam travels out through the water ahead of the animal, with a precision no speaker system we have built has matched. When it strikes an object, it reflects. The reflection returns, and a structure in the lower jaw conducts the returning sound directly to the inner ear. The sperm whale builds a picture of the world in front of it entirely from the echoes of its own voice. This is how it sees in a place where there is no light to see with. The spermaceti oil itself may serve more than one function. The oil changes viscosity with temperature. Warm, it is liquid. Cold, it is waxy and dense. When the whale dives into cold, deep water, the oil in the head cools and contracts and becomes denser. Some researchers have proposed that this shift acts as a ballast mechanism, making the head heavier and helping drive the descent. When the whale ascends, warm blood rerouted through the spermaceti organ rewarms the oil and may help reverse the ballast effect. The hypothesis is not universally accepted and has been genuinely difficult to test, because studying the internal temperature changes of a sperm whale in real time at 3,000 meters of depth is not currently possible. What is certain is that the spermaceti organ is one of the most complex structures in the mammalian world, and we understand only part of what it does. Below 300 meters, sunlight is too dim to be useful. Below 1,000 meters, there is nothing. The sperm whale descends past both thresholds on a single breath, diving to 3,000 meters and beyond. An average dive lasts 45 minutes. The whale's flexible ribcage compresses inward against its lungs. Its heart rate slows toward 2 beats per minute. Its body redirects blood from the muscles and limbs to the brain and vital organs. And its clicks, firing in rapid sequence, illuminate the dark ahead of it in a frequency that travels through water, the way light through air never could at those depths. The sperm whale hunts in absolute darkness at pressures we have not built a vehicle to withstand routinely. It finds what it is looking for. It brings it back up, and it descends again. On the skin of almost every adult sperm whale, if you could get close enough to examine the surface carefully, there are scars, circular scars, pressed into the skin in patterns that can cover broad sections of the head and body. The circles vary in diameter. The largest ones found on record exceed 30 centimeters across. They are the impressions left by the suckers of the giant squid, Architeuthis ducks, whose suckers are ringed with sharp serrations that cut as they grip. When the squid presses those suckers against the skin of a sperm whale, it leaves a permanent mark. Some of the largest bulls carry these marks in overlapping patterns across their heads and upper bodies, a record of a lifetime of encounters accumulated in total darkness at depths where nothing we have built goes routinely. We have never witnessed this encounter, not once. Not in all the hours of footage captured by submersibles deployed in the deep ocean. Not in any direct observation made by any researcher in any context since we began trying to understand what sperm whales do at depth. The conflict between the sperm whale and the giant squid is one of the most common predation events in the deep ocean, and it remains completely outside our knowledge in the sense that matters most. We have never seen it. The few live or recently dead giant squid that researchers have been able to examine showed eyes up to 30 centimeters in diameter, the largest eyes of any animal, understood to be an adaptation for detecting faint bioluminescent light in the deep water where they live. The squid may see the sperm whale coming, the whale's descent stirring bioluminescent organisms that glow briefly in the dark. Whether this gives the squid any meaningful advantage is not clear from the outcome record. A sperm whale's stomach contains the beaks of giant squid accumulated over years, because the beak is the one part of the animal that does not digest. Hard and curved and chitinous, the beaks accumulate in the stomach, the way undigested seeds accumulate in a bird. Researchers have found hundreds of beaks in a single stomach. Some of those beaks belong to animals that were as large as or larger than the whale itself. Think about what that means. In total darkness, at depths that would kill any unprotected human, a whale the size of a school bus pursues and captures an animal that may equal it in length and carries suckers that cut as they grip. The encounter leaves its evidence on both parties. The whale carries it in its skin for decades. The squid carries it not at all. The deep keeps its secrets well. This one it has kept completely, for as long as we have been asking. What the stomach contents tell us is that the sperm whale wins these encounters far more often than the scarring might suggest. The beaks of hundreds of individual squid in a single stomach represent hundreds of successful hunts. The scars on the whale's skin represent the encounters that came closest to going the other way. The vast majority of the hunts, the ones that went smoothly in the dark and left no mark on either party, are simply absent from the evidence we have. The record is made entirely of the exceptions. When a whale dies in the open ocean, it sinks. The body descends through water that grows colder and darker with depth, through the pale blue dimming to grey to absolute black, until after hours or sometimes days, it settles into the soft, silty sediment of the seafloor. And what happens then is not an ending. It is the beginning of something that will outlast almost any other single biological event in the deep ocean. The ecology around a sunken whale carcass, which biologists call a whale fall, proceeds through distinct stages and can persist for decades on a single body. The deep seafloor away from hydrothermal vents is one of the most nutrient-poor environments on Earth. Organic material arrives from above in a thin, constant rain of particles too small to sustain large organisms for long. A dead fish drifting down from the surface zone is a meaningful event for the community that receives it. A whale carcass, which might weigh 100 tons or more and arrive with its full load of blubber and oil still intact, is something of an entirely different order. The first stage is rapid. Mobile scavengers converge from across the surrounding seafloor, drawn by the chemical plume the carcass emits as it begins to break down. Sleeper sharks arrive. Hagfish arrive in numbers that can reach hundreds of individuals around a single carcass. These animals strip the soft tissue with a speed and efficiency that is difficult to imagine. A large whale carcass can be reduced to skeletons within a year. The second stage begins on the bones themselves, and it involves an organism that was unknown to science until 2002. Researchers exploring a whale fall off the coast of California in a submersible found masses of what appeared to be flowering growth covering the whale's bones. The organism, called Osedax, or bone devourer in Latin, has no mouth and no digestive tract of its own. It penetrates the bone with root-like structures and hosts bacteria inside those roots that break down the lipids stored in the bone tissue. The bacteria do the digestion. Osedax absorbs the products. Around and above the Osedax, a community develops. Tube worms and clams and mussels that derive their energy from chemical reactions rather than from sunlight. Osedax has since been found on whale falls in every ocean. It exists in the fossil record going back 30 million years. There were whale falls long before we knew to look for them. A single large whale skeleton can sustain this community for 50 to 100 years. One death, one body, half a century of life, in a place that would otherwise hold almost nothing. The whale provides this gift long after it is gone. The communities that form on deep whale falls include species found nowhere else in the ocean, except on other whale falls and around hydrothermal vents. The chemical similarity of the two environments, both running on hydrogen sulfide rather than sunlight, appears to have allowed organisms to evolve that specialize in sulfide-based habitats and move between them. Whale falls may function as stepping stones scattered across the deep seafloor, connecting the isolated vent communities that would otherwise be separated by distances too great for species to cross. In the late summer of 2018, a killer whale named Tahlequah gave birth to a calf in the waters of the Pacific Northwest. The calf was stillborn. Tahlequah was a member of a critically endangered orca population, tracked and studied for more than 4 decades. She did not let the calf sink. For 17 days, she carried the body of her dead calf at the surface of the Salish Sea, balancing it on her rostrum and diving to retrieve it each time it slipped below. The researchers who had been studying her population for more than 4 decades watched and recorded every day. They wrote about what they observed in language that was careful and precise, and at times visibly strained, against the limits of scientific vocabulary, because the straightforward language for what they were watching was the language of grief, and that word carries more than a century of contested meaning when applied to a non-human animal. After 17 days, Tahlequah released the calf. She rejoined her pod. In subsequent years, she gave birth to at least one surviving calf. The debate about cetacean emotional experience has a long and uncomfortable history in marine biology. For most of the 20th century, the dominant approach in animal behavior research was rigidly behaviorist. Actions could be described and measured, but attributing internal states to those actions was considered scientifically inappropriate. This produced a generation of researchers who observed animals doing things that in a human context would be described as grief or loss or devotion, and who described those things in language that deliberately avoided any such implication. The problem, which grew harder to ignore as decades passed and the data accumulated, was that the behaviors themselves remained in the record, regardless of what language was used for them. Tahlequah carrying her dead calf for 17 days is a behavior. It is a fact. It is in the record. The question of what was happening inside her is genuinely difficult. The question of whether something was happening is not. Tahlequah is not alone in the record. Humpback whales have been observed gathering in groups around dead calves and remaining near them for extended periods. Sperm whale females have been documented refusing to leave a dead young animal, even in the presence of approaching boats that would normally cause the group to move away. Pilot whales strand themselves on beaches while still carrying dead young, sometimes refusing refloating attempts. The behavior is consistent across species and across decades of observation, in a way that is very difficult to explain except as something that matters to the individual performing it. The ocean holds emotional lives we are still learning to acknowledge. Every winter in the warm shallow banks north of Hawaii, the male humpback whales sing. The songs are long and structured, built from phrases that repeat to form themes, and from themes that arrange into a sequence the singer moves through again and again for hours without pause. A single performance can last for hours without a break. Every male in the population sings the same song. Not similar songs, the same song, with the same phrases in the same order, updated collectively across the population, in a process no one has fully explained, so that the version heard in January is measurably different from the version in March. And this year's version differs from last year's, in ways that are measurable and consistent across the whole group. In the 1990s, researchers comparing song recordings from humpback populations across the Pacific noticed something that had no easy explanation. A new phrase type that appeared in the eastern Australian population in 1996 began spreading westward across the Pacific Basin over the following years. By 2002, the same melodic innovation had appeared in humpback populations in the eastern Indian Ocean, more than 10,000 kilometers from where it had first been recorded. The song moved through the ocean faster than the whales could travel. It moved the way a style of music moves through a human culture, through contact between individuals who learn from each other and carry what they have learned into new places. The researchers who studied this most closely, including Ellen Garland and Michael Noad, published findings in 2011 documenting the pattern in detail. What they found was not gradual diffusion, but directed transmission, moving along the migration routes that different humpback populations share. Within each population, a new phrase replaced the old form within 1 or 2 seasons of its introduction. The speed of this uptake within a population is faster than gradual individual learning would predict. The researchers propose that humpbacks may be capable of learning new song elements from a very small number of exposures in a kind of rapid cultural acquisition that has few close parallels outside of human behavior. Whether the whales experience any of this as novelty, as something new heard and deliberately incorporated, is a question the data cannot answer. What the data shows is that humpback song is a living cultural artifact. It changes, it spreads. The only storage medium we can identify is memory, held in the body of an animal swimming through the present tense of the ocean. They remember, and they pass it on. What is most striking about the song transmission data is what it implies about how humpback whales listen to each other across the ocean. The populations that receive a song innovation from another population must hear it from individuals they encounter during migration. In the mixed waters, where different populations briefly overlap, a single exposure, or perhaps a handful of exposures, is apparently enough for a whale to incorporate the new phrase and carry it back to its home waters. The song is learned. It travels in the memory of animals crossing an ocean, arriving where it arrives because the animal that carries it arrives there first. The humpback whale makes one of the longest known migrations of any mammal on Earth. Each year, populations move between cold polar feeding grounds and warm tropical breeding grounds. A round trip that for some populations covers more than 16,000 kilometers. They make this crossing without eating. The tropical breeding grounds where the songs are sung and the calves are born hold almost no food that humpbacks can use in useful quantities. The whales arrive carrying reserves of blubber, built up over months of intensive feeding in Arctic or Antarctic waters. On those reserves alone, they sustain themselves through the winter months, sustain the energetic demands of mating, and in the case of nursing, mothers produce milk, rich enough in fat to double a calf's weight in its first weeks of life. A nursing mother loses approximately 1/3 of her body mass over the course of the crossing and the months of nursing that follow. The bond between a mother and her calf during the first migration is one of the most sustained relationships observed in wild cetaceans. The calf is born in the warm breeding grounds, already measuring about 4 meters in length, and must begin the long journey toward the feeding grounds within weeks or months of birth. It travels alongside its mother in tight formation, sometimes swimming in the pressure wave the adult creates, reducing its own energy expenditure in the manner that a cyclist drives behind another. The mother produces milk containing approximately 35% fat, orders of magnitude richer than cow's milk, and the calf grows rapidly through the crossing. They travel together and they learn together. The calf watches what its mother does, and where she goes and how she moves through the water, and it carries that knowledge from one end of the ocean to the other and back. How they navigate is not fully resolved. The current best evidence suggests they use multiple overlapping systems simultaneously. The magnetic field of the Earth, which varies in detectable ways across the ocean floor. The angle and intensity of light at different times of day. the chemical composition of water masses that differ in temperature and plankton, the calls of other whales that carry for hundreds of kilometers in the deep sound channel. None of these systems is sufficient on its own. Together, they constitute a navigational capacity that performs reliably across tens of thousands of kilometers in an animal with no instruments and no maps. The calves learn the route by traveling it beside their mothers in the first year of their lives. The route transfers from one body to another. It is held in the animal. They remember where they are going, and they go there faithfully year after year. The history of humanity's relationship with whales is, for most of its recorded length, a history of killing. Coastal peoples have hunted whales for at least 4,000 years. The Basque whalers were ranging into the North Atlantic by the 14th century, establishing seasonal shore stations as far west as Labrador to process right whales, and doing it so effectively and for so long that some historians believe they drove the eastern North Atlantic right whale population to commercial extinction before the modern era of industrial whaling even began. The Dutch and British built large industrial whaling fleets in the 17th century, working the waters around Svalbard and Greenland. By the early 19th century, the American whaling fleet numbered in the hundreds of vessels, and sperm whale oil was powering the lamps of cities across the Atlantic world. The explosive harpoon cannon, introduced in the 1870s, changed the scale of the hunt permanently. Before the cannon, whalers could take only the slow-moving species, the right whales and the bowheads that floated when killed and could be processed alongside a small boat. The cannon made the fast rorquals reachable. The blue whale, the fin whale, the sea whale, the factory ship, first deployed in the early 20th century, solved the problem of the sinking carcass by processing the animal at sea. The Southern Ocean, the last great refuge of the largest whales on Earth, was opened. The factory ships that worked the Southern Ocean were not fishing vessels. They were floating processing plants, capable of hauling a full-grown blue whale up a slipway at the stern and having the entire carcass reduced to oil and meal within a few hours, ready for the next animal. A fleet in good conditions could process dozens of whales per day during the peak of the season. The season ran through the Antarctic summer, November to April, when the polar seas filled with krill and the whales came south to feed. For 50 years, the fleets came south every season. The industry noted the declining catch per unit of effort, which fell continuously from the 1940s onward, and responded by increasing effort. The logic of extraction does not naturally produce the decision to stop. Between 1900 and 1966, when the blue whale received its first international protection, the industry killed approximately 360,000 blue whales in the Southern Ocean alone. The global pre-whaling population has been estimated at between 300,000 and 400,000 animals. By the time protection arrived, the population had been reduced to somewhere between 300 and 1,000 individuals. Not 300,000, 300 to 1,000 in less than 70 years. That is the number to hold. The ocean notices an absence. The deep sound channel that runs through the ocean at mid-depth carries low-frequency sound for extraordinary distances with very little loss. It exists because of a coincidence of physics. At a certain depth, water temperature drops cold enough to slow sound, and pressure rises high enough to speed it, and the two effects cancel in a way that traps sound in a layer and guides it across thousands of kilometers like a waveguide. The great whales evolved into this channel. Their voices are tuned to the frequencies it carries best. A blue whale calling at around 15 to 20 hertz in the right location can be heard by another blue whale more than 1,000 kilometers away, under favorable conditions. When the whaling fleets of the 20th century reduced the great whale populations across the Southern Ocean, they reduced the amount of sound in the deep sound channel in those frequencies. A blue whale's call had been part of the acoustic texture of those waters for millions of years. When the blue whales were gone, that texture changed. Not suddenly, not all at once, but measurably, region by region, as the populations thinned and the remaining individuals were driven into smaller and smaller areas by the advancing fleets. The noise the whaling industry was also adding to the ocean may have partially masked the emptying it was creating. The engine noise of the factory fleets, the low rumble of the processing vessels, was itself a new presence in the deep sound channel. But when the ships moved on to new hunting grounds and the acoustic environment of the depleted areas quieted back toward its pre-industrial state, what was left in those frequencies was not what had been there before. The fin whale voices were thin. The humpback songs were absent from entire ocean regions. The low constant presence of the blue whale, which had been there since before our species existed, was gone. We do not know what that silence cost the surviving whales. We do not know what it means for an animal that navigates and finds its mates across hundreds of kilometers of dark water to call into a frequency that once carried answers and hear nothing return. We have not yet built the understanding of their inner lives necessary to ask that question properly. But the question is real. The ocean, as always, offers no easy answer. What the Navy's ocean floor hydrophone arrays picked up, when researchers were finally allowed to use them for scientific purposes after the Cold War ended, was a record of what the ocean had sounded like in the frequencies the great whales use. Researchers listening back to recordings from the 1960s found the low background signatures of blue and fin whale calls at levels corresponding to those population sizes at the time. The populations were already reduced from pre-whaling levels, but they were larger than what came later. The channel carried their voices because there were enough of them to fill it. As the researchers moved forward through the decades of recordings, the voices thinned. By the late 1970s, in some ocean regions, the frequency range that blue whales use was significantly quieter than it had been 20 years earlier. The acoustic record of the ocean's biological health is preserved in those hydrophone archives, if anyone chooses to listen. In 1986, the International Whaling Commission issued a global moratorium on commercial whaling. It was incomplete. Japan, Iceland, and Norway found legal frameworks that allowed them to continue, each under provisions allowing whaling for scientific research or under formal objection to the moratorium's terms. The hunting did not stop entirely. But for the great whales, the species that had been hunted most intensively and reduced most severely, the moratorium held in the waters where it mattered most. Recovery is slow. It is not linear. It is not guaranteed to reach what was lost. The biology of the largest whales works against rapid recovery in ways that are not immediately obvious. A blue whale does not reach sexual maturity until it is approximately 10 years old. A female produces at most one calf every 2 to 3 years. A population reduced to a few hundred individuals cannot rebuild in a generation, or in 2, or in 5. The mathematics of recovery at those reproductive rates, in an ocean that is itself changing faster than at any time in recent geological history, is not reassuring. But the populations are growing. The humpback whale in the South Atlantic, once reduced to a few hundred animals around the island of South Georgia, where the factory ships worked through the middle of the 20th century, has recovered to an estimated 25,000 individuals in that ocean. The eastern North Pacific population of blue whales, which feeds in the cold water of California and migrates south along the coast of Central America, is estimated at approximately 2,200 animals. These numbers are a fraction of the pre-whaling abundance. But they exist, they breed, they sing. Not every story of whale recovery is hopeful. The North Atlantic right whale, Eubalaena glacialis, was one of the first great whales to receive formal protection and one of the first to be hunted to near extinction. Its very name reflects the whaler's assessment of it. It was the right whale to kill. It moved slowly. It floated when dead. The Western Atlantic population survived the whaling era, barely, and has been protected for decades. It has not recovered. Approximately 500 individuals remain, and the population is in slow decline. The cause is no longer hunting. It is entanglement in fixed fishing gear and ship strikes in the same waters the whales must cross to reach their feeding grounds. Several documented individuals have been observed hauling long sections of fishing line through the water for months, the gear cutting into flesh as the whale grows around it. The species is on a trajectory that conservation biologists describe, in careful language, as functionally extinct within a generation if current mortality rates do not change. The moratorium was not enough, but it was something. It was the decision to stop, made just barely in time. The moratorium on commercial whaling ended the most immediate and the most visible of the threats to large whales. It did not end the threats. Every year, ships strike and kill large numbers of whales in the world's shipping lanes. The precise number is unknown because most strikes are never recorded, but estimates based on carcass surveys and tagging data consistently suggest that the confirmed death toll represents a fraction of the actual one. Container ships and tankers move at speeds that leave a surfacing whale no time to clear a path. The bridge of a large vessel sits high above the water and presents an almost featureless view ahead, especially in any sea state above flat calm. The strikes that do not kill immediately leave wounds that become infected, and the animals that survive the initial impact may die over the days that follow, their bodies then sinking in open water, far from any observer. Noise is a quieter threat, and in some ways a more pervasive one. The low hum of commercial shipping, the broadband noise produced by diesel engines turning propellers at depth, has been rising in the world's oceans at a rate of roughly 3 decibels per decade since the 1950s. 3 decibels represents a doubling of acoustic energy. Over 6 decades, the noise floor in the low-frequency range has roughly doubled in energy every 10 years. A blue whale's call that could once reach another blue whale 1,000 kilometers away may now be effectively masked at 500 kilometers or less. The whales that evolved in a quiet ocean are living in an ocean that has grown, in the range that matters most to them, noisier by a factor they did not evolve to accommodate. In 2000, a mass stranding of beaked whales occurred in the Bahamas during a US Navy exercise involving active sonar. 14 whales stranded. Most died. A subsequent investigation found evidence of acoustic trauma. In the years since, similar strandings have occurred near naval exercises in the Canary Islands and the Mediterranean, and in other areas of heavy naval activity. The beaked whale, which dives to extraordinary depths and appears particularly susceptible to sonar-induced behavioral disruption, has stranded in significant numbers near naval exercises in a pattern too consistent to be coincidental. The mechanism is not fully understood. The outcome is not in dispute. Fishing gear entangles right whales and humpbacks. Plastic accumulates in the stomach. Climate change shifts the distribution of the krill and small fish the whales depend on, forcing longer and more energetically costly migrations. The harpoon cannon ended with the moratorium. What replaced it came without a name. In the autumn of 2007, Inupiat hunters off the coast of Alaska killed a large bowhead whale. When they began processing the animal, they found something embedded in the thick muscle near the shoulder blade. A fragment of a harpoon tip, made from a composite material called Arctic ivory, in a style used by commercial whalers during the period between approximately 1880 and 1910. The whale had been struck more than a century earlier and survived. It had lived with that fragment lodged in its body for somewhere between 95 and 130 additional years. Bowhead whales live longer than any other mammal we know of with confidence. The method that revealed this is unusual. The crystalline proteins of the eye lens form in the embryo and do not turn over during the animal's lifetime, accumulating chemical changes at a predictable rate. Analysis of those changes allows researchers to estimate age at death. The data from multiple individuals has suggested that the maximum lifespan of the bowhead whale approaches 200 years. Some researchers place the upper limit at 210 years or more. The bowhead genome was sequenced in 2014, and researchers studying the sequence found several genes involved in DNA repair and cell cycle regulation that appear in modified forms in the bowhead, different from the versions found in shorter-lived mammals. Some of these modifications have been associated with enhanced ability to repair damaged DNA and to suppress the uncontrolled cell division that leads to cancer. An animal with, perhaps, 100 times as many cells as a human that lives 200 years without developing detectable cancer at the rates predicted by body size alone has solved a problem in molecular biology that we have not. The solution may be in the genome, and the genome is now being read. A bowhead whale alive today at the estimated maximum lifespan was born before the American Civil War. It was alive when the explosive harpoon cannon was invented. It was alive when the factory ships arrived. It was alive when the moratorium was passed. It has been breathing at the surface of the same cold Arctic water since before our grandparents were born. Some of those whales carry in their bodies the physical record of what we did to them. Old harpoon tips, corroded and surrounded by scar tissue and muscle that has grown around the wound over a century. They were here before us, and some of them remember. The bowhead's immune system has been of particular interest to researchers studying longevity because the animal appears to age differently from shorter-lived mammals. Most mammals accumulate cellular damage and chronic inflammation over time in a process that eventually becomes self-reinforcing. Damage causes inflammation. Inflammation causes more damage, and the cycle accelerates toward organ failure. In the bowhead, something interrupts this cycle, or slows it dramatically, or prevents it from beginning at the rate that would be expected. The genes associated with inflammation regulation in the bowhead genome show modifications not found in related whales with shorter lifespans. Whether those modifications are the mechanism of extended life, or merely correlated with it, remains an open question. But the bowhead is, among all mammals, the species that has come closest to solving the problem of aging. It simply did not do it for our benefit, or with any awareness that the problem existed. Tonight, in the waters of the Pacific, and the Southern Ocean, and the deep Atlantic, the whales continue. The blue whale is there, crossing water we cannot follow it through, and producing a voice we can hear only with instruments, carrying a life so large and so slow that our categories for such things barely reach it. The sperm whale is there, descending in the dark toward a battle we have never witnessed, firing clicks into the abyss in a language of sound it has used for 23 million years. The humpback is there, carrying in its memory the route between cold water and warm, the same route its mother traveled, and its mother's mother before that, a map held not in stone or paper, but in the body of an animal swimming through the present tense of the ocean. And somewhere in the Arctic, the bowhead is there, an animal 200 years old, or close to it. An animal that has outlived the industry that tried to end its kind, that carries fragments of a century-old harpoon in its muscle, that has been breathing at the surface of the same cold water since before our grandparents were born. 200 years of ocean, 200 years of sound, 200 years of the same water, which is no longer the same water, which has been warmed and filled with noise and crossed by ships it did not evolve to hear. We came very close to removing all of this from the world, in the span of less than 70 years between the first factory ships and the signing of the moratorium. We reduced some of these populations by more than 97%. We did not stop because we had taken enough. We stopped because there were almost none left to take. And then, barely in time, we stopped. What we owe the whales that remain is not simple. We owe them the deep sound channel, quieter than it is now. We owe them shipping lanes, adjusted, and speed limits, enforced in the waters they must cross. We owe them the ordinary calculus of commerce weighted just slightly more toward the oldest lives, sharing the water with our vessels. We owe them the ocean that has not been warmed past the point where the krill they need can still gather in the quantities they require. But we owe them something else as well, something harder to put into the language of policy. We owe them the right to remain partially unknown. There is a value in the blue whale's existence that is not captured by what the blue whale contributes to the carbon cycle, or what its blubber chemistry might tell us about ocean health, or what its navigational precision might teach us about engineering. The value is simpler than those things, and in some ways harder to defend. The blue whale exists It is the largest life this planet has ever produced. It crosses oceans and calls across hundreds of miles, and carries its young and grieves its dead, and sings in its breeding grounds and descends into darkness we cannot enter. That existence is worth protecting, not because of what it provides us, because of what it is. The ocean is old. It does not keep its secrets carelessly. It keeps them because it has been keeping them far longer than we have been asking, and it has never needed our permission to do so. The whales are part of those secrets, the largest part, the part that breathes at the surface and then descends again into the dark, where we cannot follow. And in the deep water tonight, something is moving, something enormous and slow and largely unknown, something that was there before we arrived, and that will continue, if we allow it, long after. There is always something deeper. There is always something more to discover. And there is always still a profound, beautiful, and necessary mystery waiting patiently in the dark.